Hey, this is Vaughn Vernon. Welcome to my Design Accelerator tutorials. This week I'm talking about estimates versus no estimates. Do you fall into the trap where you're required to provide estimates on an entire project or even a sprint or anything like that? Why do people want estimates? What is that really about? And how do we provide accurate estimates or avoid it altogether, or find some kind of happy balance between the two? That's what I'm getting into this week. So please join me and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get going. I think many, if not most of us, have been there before. We're expected to provide estimates on the delivery of software milestones throughout a software lifecycle. Years ago, one organization that I worked with had a policy that if you couldn't complete a project within 6 months, the project would be rejected. So everybody's answer to when will this be done? Of course, 6 months or less was exactly the answer. Some companies want paperwork. They want to know, how did you come up with the numbers? How did you reach those? Let's see the calculations. Let's see the actual details of the estimate. How do we come up with those? Do you lick your finger, stick it in the wind, and say a number? Is that it? We sometimes feel good about what seems obvious to us in a software effort, but there's almost always some kind of trap or multiple traps that are lurking under what seems obvious, and those catch us off guard when we reach them. And we don't know that they're there until we encounter them. In the end, it seems like even with the best of intentions that we software developers have, any estimates that we make are about as accurate as licking our finger and sticking it into the wind. It doesn't matter if you're using the Scrum approach, which includes t-shirt sizes, story points, and things like that. There just seems to be no science or math around those. It's just a feeling. And many times those feelings, even when we seem to be overestimating, are still short of what the actual time is be required to deliver those software features and functionality that we're obligated to deliver. All software estimates are just guesses, and we have to be really careful because we're the ones who are held accountable. And I think a lot of times that's what it's about. It's about, yeah, they want to know how much it's going to cost, but if we don't get the estimates correct, and most of the times we're going to miss, then we're in trouble for it. Software developers are the ones who are going to pay for it because they were wrong. They don't know what they're doing. And, you could invite executives into those meetings where we discuss the estimates, where we try to come up with the numbers. They couldn't do any better. In fact, they're probably going to do much worse than us because they are optimistic about everything, and they are thinking about dollars, and they're thinking about customers, clients, and those who need to get the software in their hands, so to speak. So how do we do this? Developers, architects, project managers, product owners, product managers, how do we succeed at this when it seems like it's almost impossible? Well, that's what I'm going to get to today. Next, I'm referencing a number of artifacts from my previous Design Accelerator tutorials. Here's one of my favorites. It's a bounded context with a domain model that handles commands that are submitted by users. The model employs aggregates with an expressive, ubiquitous language that is designed as rich behavior on aggregates. When accepted, the command handling leads to domain events being emitted from the aggregates. The events are then consumed downstream by interested parties. Okay, so what does this have to do with software estimates? I'm getting to that. Actually, right now, I'm backing my way into explaining where the estimates come in, or let's call them no estimates for now as placeholder. But I need to explain a few things first. So the question isn't really how does this lead to software estimates? The question right now is how do we get from the concepts of the business mental model to working software in a domain model? That's the question that we want to answer first. A few months ago, I published the Design Accelerator tutorial, Commands Not Queries. If you haven't watched that tutorial yet, I suggest doing so soon. It demonstrated the importance of using commands across context boundaries and why the outcomes from commands can be more powerful than query results. It has to do with the emitted domain events being the result of handling commands and the fact that nobody can predict the future. Well, that leaves you with a cliffhanger. Go watch the video soon. The question remains then, how do we get from the concepts of the business mental model to working software models like we see here? Well, that leads to yet another set of artifacts from a previous tutorial. Let's go there next. The previous Design Accelerator tutorial that I'm referring to now is entitled Events First Discovery and Modeling, Event Storming to DDD Tactical Design. By the way, I'm including the links to all of these previous tutorials in the description below. This particular tutorial introduced, of course, event storming. In event storming, its modeling elements include commands, events, policies, aggregates, user roles, processes, views, and hotspots. And there are a few other details as well. I gave subscribers an introduction to big picture event storming. You can see this on the lower left of the diagram here with the timeline, big picture event storming. And I also explained how this can lead to design level storming, which you can see the more detailed storming in the larger elements on the lower right of the diagram. During design level storming, there's much more focus on design details, much closer to tactical modeling. And this will be within individual bounded contexts, so focused on bounded contexts. Now, this includes details that can be taken to near implementation, and this is key to reaching the point where we can provide no estimates to those who want estimates. As you can see here, I have a timeline that represents a single business behavior. You can see from the user role through to a view at the far right side. This uses an architectural pattern that I discussed when covering the vertical slice architecture in a previous tutorial as well. It's known as the steel thread, and it runs from left to right. It's a steel thread because steel is strong, it's important, and it's a single thread that represents basically a single behavioral scenario or storyline or use case or whatever you'd like to call it. And we can step through this now. It starts with a user role that sees a view, and through the view of data, the user submits a command. The command will reach an aggregate, but it has to pass a policy in order to be accepted as a valid behavior inside the aggregate. So the policy being some kind of a set of business rules or constraints or whatever is needed to enforce a specific kind of behavior. From that, if the command is fully accepted and executed, an event is emitted. That event will pass through another policy which will know what to do with that event, and in some cases the event will be used to project a view of some kind. And then we start over again at the next side, and let me just put another view in here. And so again, the user will see a view of data, use the view to determine a command to submit, and we carry on again with another steel thread. Now, this is based on my experience that I've used over many years of producing this kind of steel thread, a point of reasoning. If you're familiar with event storming already, you may or may not be familiar with my steel thread approach. It basically represents, as I said before, a single behavioral scenario, one of those threads, or a storyline or a use case. I find it useful. You may or may not find it useful. You may agree or disagree. That won't change my mind. I find this quite useful, and I am able to make now a point about this regarding no estimates and how to provide no estimates to those who want estimates. I need to say that I'm not invested in the overall NoEstimates movement. I'm not even sure where the NoEstimates community is these days, how they're faring. The reason that I'm using the term NoEstimates is because in discussing my approach with an experienced NoEstimates practitioner, they told me that this approach would be considered a NoEstimates approach. So the three primary points that my approach addresses is to use a more scientific way of reasoning and using simple math to deliver a number. That's the first point. The second is follow an approach that fits a good design practice naturally. And third, make the outcome as fast as possible because it's based on what I do anyway. This stands in sharp contrast to approaches that can take longer to complete than to actually do the software development work in the first place. I've seen this many times where it takes weeks to estimate a solution that requires less time to actually deliver. That's not what we want, and we should be able to, as engineers, do this very effectively and quickly. Now you can see just how incredibly simple this is. Basically, we take our timeline and we identify the most closely related artifacts or model elements, and we put those each into an estimation unit. Now, consider here what I've done. I consider the user and the view together. This actually represents a user interface and possibly having to support a new user role if they don't already exist in the system, and a view which is the data, but this will be combined into a user interface element as well. You also have the command and a policy that is related to the command. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have a separate class or function of some kind that is completely separate from the command handler. This together will be a command handler with some business rules or constraints. Over here we have the aggregate, which basically represents some kind of a structure as well as state management. So based on the command and the policy and when it is executed, you'll have to maintain the state within the aggregate. The event that is emitted by the aggregate is itself a separate estimation unit. And the policy that coordinates the projection of data as an outcome from the event into a view is also a separate estimation unit. Now, you'll actually estimate each of these in their own element itself. So the model element, each one of these will have its own estimation or metric number associated with it. But then what you want to do is take this as a single work item, something that has to be worked on in order to deliver this part of the overall steel thread, and that's going to, as a group, have a single estimation unit as well. But now the question is, how do we assign each element individually and then tally that as an estimation unit? How can that be done? Well, that's the key point coming up next. And here you have the linchpin of the whole deal. This is a spreadsheet, a table that is laid out with component type down the left-hand side, and then the level of complexity as in simple, moderate, and complex with metrics in each of these columns. So you're going to match the component type with the level of complexity across this, and you're going to assign that to each of the model elements within a steel thread timeline. After you do that, you're going to bring the estimation units and tally them individually. Then you'll tally each of the steel threads individually, and then you can have a total for all of the steel threads within, for example, an iteration. The smaller batches that you have, the more accurate it's going to be. Now, I'm not recommending any kind of larger batch, although I do have some experience with that, and I've even been within about 20% on a 6-month effort. This was many years ago, more than 15 years ago, and it was a rational unified process or RUP-based waterfall effort over a 6-month period of time. And we ended up being quite accurate with it. So I recommend small batches. That's how we work best. That's how our minds work. But I think you'll really find this a useful approach to no estimates to those who require estimates. If you've read my book, Domain-Driven Design Distilled, you probably recognize at least some of this material. It's found in Chapter 7, Acceleration and Management Tools. And for the rest of this tutorial today, you'll find most of the other information also in Domain-Driven Design Distilled. So if you haven't read it already, it's a short read. It's about 160 pages or so. Many people read it in 4 to 6 hours, and you're going to learn a lot from it, and you'll have a good reference to both event storming and other aspects of using domain-driven design in projects. So I welcome you to read it. That's all the time I have today. I hope that you'll check out my workshop, the IDD workshop. We have some upcoming workshops very soon now. I hope to meet you there. Until then, take care.